The Faze team that we know today was formed in August of 2017 when they picked up Olaf Meister and Guardian from their respective teams of Na'Vi and Fnatic. Over the course of its 7th-month run so far, it has been one of the most power-hungry rosters in town, and at the time, many expected it to be the best team in the world for the foreseeable future. And for a little time, they were nothing short of terrifying. They've got first at ESL 1 New York, first at E-League Premier. Wasn't even a contest for them. They didn't lose a single map, and that was, of course, of a 13-map win streak on land, which Faze would hold on for the next couple of months, and it was admittedly cut short. I definitely think it could have gone a little bit further if it wasn't for a small lapse in form. But as they hit Epicenter, as they lost that particular as they lost that map streak, things started to go very, very awry for Faze. They lost their map streak to Gambit in a best-of-3 in the opening match of the group stage of Epicenter. They did win the series overall, so they went on to face SK in the upper match of that group stage. And they lost to them. They went to face VP in the decider match, and they lost to them as well in the series. So Faze, after coming hot off of 2 extremely dominant land victories, came into the into this tournament with a major sort of advantage and major favoritism, but they ended up losing pretty hard. And from there, they started losing pretty hard in a lot of other series, and more specifically grand finals over the course of the rest of the year and the beginning of this year so far. So against NIP and IEM Oakland, they lost against them. Lost against SK Gaming in the EPL Season 6 finals. They lost against Cloud9 in the major upset. They lost against Fnatic in the IEM Katowice finals, and most recently as well, top 4 at Star Series and V4 Future Sports. Well, they actually lost to Virtus Pro in that V4 Future Sports tournament. The only grand final they've reached where they've managed to win, which is definitely the exception to this rule, was against Mouse Sports in the ECS Season 4 finals, the final tournament of the year, in fact, for Counter-Strike. And even then, this was almost an upset for Mouse Sports. I think a couple of good rounds going their way. If they'd taken the map, they probably could have taken this in 2-0, that particular match. And I remember it so well watching it live. It was a very, very good time to be a Counter-Strike fan. But it's due to these below expected performances there. After the V4 tournament, a few analysts have been quoted stating that they think that Faze has run its course. More specifically, Thorin has made this particular comment. A guy I look up to, a guy that I'm really inspired by, and I think his particular tweet that he put out kind of does apply in half. Now, I'll just read the tweet as a quote for you. This Faze lineup has run its course. Tons of tournaments, tons of top 4s, tons of finals, and 3 titles. For some teams, that would be great, but need to be many more titles. And I definitely feel like the second half of that tweet does apply. For what Faze have accomplished, many teams would be ecstatic about that, and I definitely feel like they would have no problems breaking up and thinking about looking at other different things if that was where they really felt. But as for it, I think Faze has run its course. I don't necessarily agree with that particular part. Most of my philosophy revolves around if you can hold out with the lineup you've got, then you definitely should. But at the same time, I also recognize when a team is definitely plateauing. Back in 2017, I went on Jinx to talk about the IEM Katowice event, and during that interview, I was Fnatic's performance was brought up, and they asked me to comment on what I believe about that. But by this point, Fnatic were nothing compared to their 2015, 2016, or 2015 run, early 2016 form. By the time I did the interview, they had come off a couple of top 4s finishes and only really managing top 4 at the major, but top 8 or lower at DreamHack Masters, IEMs, ESL 1s, Epicenters, E-Leagues, all of the typical sort of standard tournaments you'd see. They were just not really making it out of groups, not making it deep into the playoff stage. Whereas Faze right now are still constantly and consistently making top 4s and top 2s. So to say they run out of fuel is a statement that I don't necessarily agree. If anything, I'd argue that they're in a state just before Fnatic and their 2016 to 2017 period started to completely fall off and start to lose a lot of tournaments and really not make it very far at all. And considering that Fnatic were coming off of being the best team in the world and Faze are coming off being the best team in the world, this still presents a problem, because if they do keep going this way, they will ending up in top 8s and group stages all across the town when we hit about the mid-18 to late 2018 points. So for the sake of argument, and for the sake of just discussion in general, let's propose a couple of hypotheticals. I'm going to give you 3 of my particular hypothetical examples of what I think the issues in Faze could be at the moment, and at the end I'm going to provide a couple of different solutions to what you could do to solve all of these issues at once. So We'll start with my first one, which is complacency. Now, this is something that's been on my mind quite a lot recently, especially when you're talking about Rocket League. And I bring this up because I definitely feel like the situation in Rocket League is also applicable to FaZe and most, actually, of the World Championship teams in CSGO as a whole. In Rocket League, we have what's coined as the Champion's Curse, or the flip side effect, where the best team in the world will not win another title due to a combination of that team being complacent and the other teams in the scene managing to find counters to them, manage to play better than them, and just be better as a whole. And it's also coined the flip side effect because Flipside were the first team that really suffered from this problem. Now, I bring this up again because it's very similar to drawing the parallels of where CSGO stands. To bring up a couple of former world champions that we've seen in the past. Fnatic, again, going back to them, they rose to prominence and then they managed to plateau and then eventually fall off into a very, very poor manner of form because they got complacent with their old style, and many other teams caught up to that style, countered that style, and put them back in a position where they weren't able to compete at the world's best anymore. It was only when Fnatic took a shift and managed to change their IGL, Golden, to bring a completely new style to their old core, bringing in the results that we see today, winning IEM Katowice, winning, I can't remember what the second tournament was, I can't remember what it was, but in short, you know, Fnatic have been doing absolutely fantastic so far. Oh yeah, it was WESG, that's it, so winning the IEM Katowice event, winning WESG, and as well as that, another world champion, Astralis, also did a very similar thing. You know, it took them a while after they come out of their TSM days and going through question mark to compete in the SLESEA Pro League. They formed Astralis. They weren't getting the good results. They were getting second to last places. They were getting grouped out. They were losing out to some teams in Denmark at the time, which, you know, at the time, Astralis were considered the best team in Denmark, but they started to lose that sort of grip. So in the end, they swapped out Carrigan for Glaive, not before they swapped out KJMB for Kiabi, but Glaive's the in-game leading shifted up Astralis' playstyles to where they weren't complacent, and they took it into a major victory and an IEM Katowice victory back in 2017. Now, since then, obviously, Astralis have fallen off the wayside a little bit. I think in a little bit part due to a couple of complacency problems, but that being said, Astralis are similar to FaZe in that they are still making top fours and sometimes hitting that top 2 position. And of course these solutions do cover some roster swaps, obviously, but I bring them up and I bring up these examples because complacency could be a prime contributor to the issues that FaZe are having, and an issue in particular to the finals problem that the team is having. But more on the finals problem a little bit later. I do have another little segment where we do talk about that in more detail. Now, my second hypothesis is what's called talent fat. Now, during the whole fallout of the V4 festival and when FaZe went out in the semi-finals, Thorin was in a conversation with Lurpis on Twitter, and he said, the flaw in FaZe for my money is they think it's a luxury to have all these stars, but I think it's actually a waste. Take out Olaf and put in MBK, Zifnix, Zifnix, MBK, etc., and I think you would win more titles. There's this concept about having so many stars in the roster that you have a little bit almost of a mentality of, okay, well, now I know that this player over here is going to do a hell of a job, so I can really rest on my laurels and I can just take it chill for this next match. But you look at the way that that kind of works out in FaZe, and it looks like that is almost a bit more of another problem in their own right. You know, they've got a little bit of role redundancy. They've got a lot of star players, some of which don't really perform up to the same level, maybe because other stars are stepping on their toes, or just in general, they just don't feel like they need to perform because someone else might do it, for example. And as well as that, talking about role redundancy in the team, you've got 2 players, Nico and Olafmeister, who are both lurkers. They are entry lurkers, and you know, of course, they got Rain as the primary entry, Guardian as the AWP, Carrigan as a very frag-based IGL. But what Thorin is basically trying to say is that removing someone like Olaf, who is sharing a lurker role with Nico, maybe giving a more redundant role to maybe a support player, because he mentioned Zifnix and MBK, a support player that could set up the rest of the stars, allow Rain to enter as appropriate, you know, set up smokes and flashbangs for executions, allow Rain to just rush into a site, get headshots aplenty, maybe also allow Guardian to back him up with the AWP from a flanking angle, for example. And, you know, just setting up players like that, as well as allowing maybe Nico to push aggressive lurk on the other side of the map, get an opening pick and just back right off. And obviously that's a solution that gives these star players more room to breathe, another role for them to fill to allow them to set themselves up. So that way you're not wasting talent by being complacent and not wasting talent by allowing all of the talent to step on their toes. You're giving another role to another player who sets up that talent to be as effective as you can be. And I think that's actually a very, very good idea of where you can do it. Again, it does involve roster swaps, and I can't really see another way in which that solution would end up being evolving into just changes in particular in the team as a whole. Unless maybe you wanted to take someone like Olaf and Nico and try and turn them into a support player. I definitely feel like for Olaf, that may be a very good consideration for him. He's 27 years old these days. You know, he's definitely past the average prime of a Counter-Strike pro, and I feel like maybe if he wanted to continue his career at a top level without becoming a coach, that may be a good route for him, or otherwise becoming in the IGL in the same sort of way that Carrigan did as well. So my third hypothesis is issues in the roster itself, and this is where we're going to get really, really in-depth on this one. I'm going to kind of go broad strokes. I'm not going to do the same sort of analysis where I start to break down individual statistics and individual players, but for certain I'm going to go and look more in-depth to the issues that FaZe have on server. I'm not talking about internal issues or clashes with personalities. I'm talking about in-server performances in the grand finals and the semi-finals that they have lost as a whole. I'm going to be skipping Epicenter for this little match breakdown segment because I definitely think at the time I viewed it as a red herring tournament, and I think that given the context of where we're looking at right now, FaZe, I think that this context also still applies with Epicenter. So we'll start at IEM Oakland instead, which was the first grand final loss that FaZe took against NIP. This was a best of 5. And for the most part, each team was winning their respective maps. NIP won Cobble and Train, their own map picks. And of course, Cobble is a very, very awful map for FaZe, as we know, going into the current situation. And FaZe won Inferno and Overpass convincingly, I should add. It wasn't even a case that NIP broke double digits. And of course, NIP did a very good veto. They managed to ban out, they managed to force FaZe to ban either Nuke or Cobblestone, which ended up being very great for NIP, because that way they could get Cobble in and get basically a free map above the FaZe roster. And NIP as a whole had this one event where they overperformed by a significant margin, something that we'll see when we break down the maps, because from Train, NIP, they had Forest and Rez and Get Right performing stupidly good at 1.22 to 1.53 ratings for those particular players. But for FaZe, they had very, very poor performance, especially on their T side as well. Entry frags themselves, Rain lost more entries than he actually found, and Guardian was actually doing better work in the entry fragging department with the AWP. Which admittedly isn't a major issue, considering that, you know, the AWP can do some very good entry fragging as a role as a whole, if you know how to use it appropriately. But, you know, for Train, that was an NIP victory. And then Cash with the decider map. Now, this is where things got a lot more awkward, because FaZe really should have won this map, but it was the last thing of the series. It was the last map of the series. And something that I've noticed going on throughout as we take a look at these map breakdowns, you'll notice that in a lot of best of 5 scenarios, FaZe will make it to that final map, or they'll make it close towards that final map, and then they'll just lose straight up, maybe due to fatigue, maybe just due to mental fatigue, or just, you know, mentality game, just slipping off the edge. In terms of performance for this one in particular, Nico was the best performer, taking most of the frags and getting the highest rating out of everybody. But the issue really rested in the fact that the rest of FaZe weren't keeping up with him. It was actually NIP that kept up and managed to outpace FaZe in terms of rounds. In terms of rounds, FaZe had a great CT side, but they had a very bad T side. The conversion rounds had a couple of issues after winning the pistol. NIP were doing a great job of getting entries when they were bursting into the sites of the T side. They started a very, very close first half, and then the T side, where FaZe just only scored 4 rounds in that second half, meant that NIP ended up winning the series as a whole. And it definitely felt like NIP were abusing a bunch of different non-standard positions, like the Shroud boost or B-Hall's box. And they also denied FaZe's bomb plants at almost every single time. They only got a bomb plant once, which was actually defused in that particular map. So FaZe had a bunch of different problems in terms of teams composition and the way they played that one against NIP and the way that NIP played around them. And that's what led to them losing IEM Oakland. So we'll move on to the next grand final, which was against SK at the EPL Season 6 finals. Already this is a tough match, so I wouldn't even give too much flack towards FaZe for losing this one, because SK at the time was still a very, very capable roster, and FaZe were also just as capable, but had many issues against SK in the past. And I definitely think that just during that particular small spurt of period, SK were the best team in the world, even though FaZe were ranked a little bit higher based on their own past achievements at that time. Again, we take a look at the ESL on New York and the E-League Premier stuff. But again, this was another, again, just looking at the details, this was another tournament that had a best-of-5 finish, which we already know, and I've already stated I don't think FaZe do well at. This is another case where this supports that. Along most maps, FaZe had individuals stepping up, but brought down by underperformances by the rest of their team. Mostly, the 3 names that pop up the most consistently in this series and across most of the series are Nico, Rain, and olofmeister. They either had performances where they were mediocre at best or they absolutely shit the bed, and the core 3 or 4 players of SK were doing much better than the core of FaZe in the server stats. So once again, it was a 3-1 score in the series, and SK won EPL. Now, this one is the one that's the most surprising overall for FaZe, because you take a look at versus Cloud9 in the E-League Major Boston, and there's no way you would ever expect FaZe to be able to lose this one. I definitely looked into this one thinking to myself, I don't think Cloud9 are going to be able to take a map. Well, maybe they might take one map based off of momentum. But in a best-of-3 series, I definitely think FaZe should have won this. They haven't got the issues of marathoning matches like they did in the last couple of series at IEM and EPL. And in a best-of-3 environment, I definitely think that their mentality game and their fatigue is much, much better compared to what Cloud9 could have brought to the table. So, where are the problems in this series, and why did FaZe lose 2-1 against Cloud9? Well, again, it pertains to one individual player or a couple of individual players not doing as well as we really expected them to do. Mostly Nico turning up in the bottom 3 players map for map, except Inferno, where he was the best performer for his team. But even then, the rest of FaZe weren't keeping up with him, and that's as a result of and that's what resulted in them eventually losing the series, because that was the last map. You combine that with an overperformance from Cloud9, who again had the crowd on their side. I definitely think the home field advantage is something you do have to take into account when weighing up teams' potential in a tournament overall. And as well as that, you know, that's what really boosts up Tarek and Skadoodle to really bring serious performances over and a lot of clutches to the series that tip Cloud9 over. I definitely remember the B-site hold from, I believe it was Skadoodle himself with the AWP. I definitely remember it was one of the AWP players from Cloud9 that on a B-site alone absolutely shut down FaZe. And when the time was against FaZe in that series, in that map as well on Inferno, it really got the better of them, and that's what allowed Cloud9 to just exploit those small little problems, make them into massive and big problems, and overall just win it out as a result. Again, I'm no psychiatrist or anything, but I do feel like, just to bring it up one more time, the mentality game was definitely in the favour of Cloud9. They had the Boston crowd around them. They were the second NA team, sorry, to make it. Is it? I believe it was the second NA team to make it to a major grand final on home soil as well. Means that they had, you know, a major backing from Boston. And I'm no psychiatrist or anything. Again, I'm not a major mental game expert or anything like that. But this overperformance from Cloud9 was never carried over to any other tournament as of yet from Boston. So I feel like it's at least a factor to consider when taking a look at this series as individuals, and maybe to look at Cloud9 as a whole later on down the road, see if they can replicate that major performance. So now we go on to the next tournament, which is IEM Katowice, the latest grand final they've made it towards, and they've not been able to win again. This was a very serious clashing of styles. I think more from individual, the teams as a whole rather than individual performances. Again, individual performance was a little bit more, it was a little bit less prominent, because you've really got the loose, flexible style on the fly calling that FaZe and Karrigan have dominated with and brought to the table and done extremely good stuff with, versus Golden's new style that has unlocked the talent and potential of the old core of Fnatic, plus the true talent of Lekro, who I believe during the Swedish Shuffle and during that particular period of CS was a very underrated player. Now I think he's a very good player, definitely not to the same sort of level as FaZe's core, but I definitely feel like he's great as a support, and he can be a very good performer to back up that entire core roster. So as a result, this series was close. We all know it. We went 3 overtimes across all 5 maps, but it was another best of 5. And again, this is an issue that FaZe have had. So the last map, which was what it came down to. Train was that map that ended up just remaining in the pool. And it's very interesting that Train does remain as one of the final maps in each of these series, or at least one of the crucial maps in each of these best of 5 and best of 3 series, because FaZe, prior to this point in in history had played Train in 2 of the last 3 finals that they had reached, and they lost it every single time. And this was, of course, no exception. They made it 3 for 4 and losing it all 3 times. And in the end, it was Golden's Core that won. Obviously, we all know how that final ended up. But it was, again, in combination from performance from Faze players as well. But as well as that, Golden's Core did a very good job, you know. Flusher was godlike in this series. He was the MVP of the tournament and of the, well, in my opinion, he was the MVP of the tournament. And he was the MVP of this grand final for certain. Won Clutch after Clutch, being one of the top-ranked players in the whole series. And again, one of the top-ranked players of the whole tournament as well. And the Flusher was also the top player in all of the maps for this final that Fnatic had won, including a godlike performance on Train, which just blew everybody else out of the water, winning the tournament for Fnatic. On the Faze side of things, Rain was absent for most of the series, and Nico was asleep on Overpass, a map that I definitely feel like Fnatic should have done a lot better on than they did. And both of these players really cost Faze their maps and the match due to their inconsistent performance metrics. And it's another problem we've seen time after time. Rain and Nico were also problems in the past couple of series that we've seen at IEM and EPL, and I think to a certain extent, Nico certainly was an issue during the major finals. And then, of course, we look on to the latest tournament, the one that's just gone by this past weekend, against Virtus.pro in the V4 Future Sports Festival in the semi-finals. Faze didn't even make the grand final this time. And there are 2 key factors that really killed Faze on this one. Now, number 1 was seriously newfound form from Virtus.pro, which I will give them a full amount of credit for. Mihu is on fire for this roster, and it's really what I think Virtus.pro need to try and boost himself back to life in the current scene of CSGO. Mihu was the MVP of the match for certain. Pasha coming in second. He's always had a good form. He's always had a major sort of, you know, performance. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here, but basically he's been a very good performer for Virtus.pro when it really matters for them. And VP also managed to take very good T sides as well as a whole, which really what allowed them to shut down Faze 2-0. It was 16-14 on the first map, mostly down to some very, very good T side performance from them. Of the 32 rounds that VP scored in this series, half of them were T sided rounds. Even on Nuke, which was the second map, and yeah, Nuke is a VP map, but it's a very big hassle on T side. It always has been a major hassle on the T side. And as a result, VP had a very, very good shout at this one. Faze, as a result, had one of their worst semi-final performances ever. This time it was Olof that was the worst performing lurker compared to Nico, who actually had the best performance overall for Faze. And, you know, even to the point where Faze, I believe, had a major issue in terms of mentality and confidence. Guardian had a lapse in form. He was doing awful. He had... yeah, he was the worst player on Faze for Cash on Nuke. He was the worst player in the server in general. And Guardian really is one of those players, for Faze especially, who has performed consistently well on all of the maps that they've been able to play with. So seeing him go like this really does outline the issues that Faze have been having at the moment. But, you know, just in conclusion to the way that all these series have played out and what it teaches us is that the problems from Faze really stem from small inconsistencies that become much bigger threats when they are put under pressure. These problems don't necessarily need a roster swap to fix them, which is why I present this as my third and final hypothesis, because players can work on themselves individually, they can work on themselves in context of their team, and apply themselves in a different way that irons out these issues as a whole, as well as that mentality game comes into play, which is part of what my solution comes up with later on during, well, actually, about now, actually. I'm going to be talking about some of the solutions that I would personally put in place if I was a Faze coach, a Faze manager, someone in the roster who could make these kind of considerations. And my first personal solution, the one that I put up first, this is where I prioritize things, is just to take a quick look at the Faze and put a lot more emphasis on boot camp and practice. If I was Robban, I know I've got a few more weeks until the next LAN event with DreamHack Masters Messiah. I would be putting Faze in, like, well, we'll play our officials from this one location, and during our spare time, we practice. Because if I was Robban, I'd be taking a look at this team thinking, we have the capability of being the best team in the world currently, but we have problems that seriously need to be addressed. And I feel like that, you know, my personal philosophy to the game if I was Robban would be just, right, let's iron out these issues. Let's get Nico consistent. Let's get Olaf consistent. Let's make sure Guardi doesn't fall off the edge. And let's make sure that Rain can do his job and entry frag like a mofo. And that's what I'd recommend to be the first step in this particular case. And this could not just only apply to the team as a whole, but you could also work directly with Olaf and Nico and potentially even Rain to improve their confidence as a whole in the general level of play in the semi-finals, which is a great segue to my second solution, which is a sports psychologist. This worked really well for Astralis back when they won the major. They brought in a sports psychologist, improved their mentality game. They did a great job overall. And they did, they just did some fantastic work in total with that sports psychologist. They got themselves 2 grand finals, 2 trophies, 2 of the most prestigious trophies as well: the E-League Major, the Major Grand Final, and the IEM Katowice Final. And I'm not 100% certain if FaZe do currently have that in their roster, but I think that it could be a hire that FaZe would love to do well with. They've already spent loads of money on this roster. They've already, bought into CSGO as a whole, and they're sticking out with it 100%. And, it does iron out issues that may not be related to in-game performances, but could affect in-game performances based on the mentality of the FaZe roster at the moment. But, of course, we do have another solution, which I have been mentioning a couple of different times, one that I've been trying to stamp out from your minds, but it's something that we do need to address and something we need to look at as a whole, and that is the roster swap. I don't like to go with this solution, at least unless it's 100% necessary, when I feel like this roster really has run out of steam and there really is no other way forward. But it is an option I can see FaZe taking. They're no strangers to replacing teams and players. They're no stranger to completely revamping the roster as a whole. Like compared to FaZe's first venture into CS:GO, I think they've only got 1 player remaining from that original roster, and that is Rain. Obviously, they've changed out the parts, they've swapped bits and pieces, they've completely revamped the roster over the course of a period of time, and I feel like that could also be the case right here as well if they wanted to do so. For me, if I had to make that decision, if I had to make the tough call, the 2 players I'd see the most likely getting cut is probably Olaf or Nico, because both players play the same role, the Rifle Lurk, and both have consistently had some awful performances in this FaZe lineup. If I had to weight one over the other, I'd probably pick Nico to stay in the roster due to his age and the potential to get far better over the coming few years. Or Olaf Meister. I definitely feel like doesn't have the same sort of potential to go higher in his career. He's 27. He's had a lot of prime. He's had 3 major titles, so many more in between. I think maybe if you wanted to try and convert him to a supportive role, I think maybe you can get a little bit more mileage out of him, which could be another solution, maybe solution 4. But, for now I'm just going to stick with my current solution, number 3 in the roster swap. And who I'd get to replace Olaf Meister is probably a player who fits that supportive role. Again, I do agree that if Thorin wanted to make a roster swap, then the best would be to go for someone on that supportive role, someone like a Zifnix or an MBK, which I do think are some very good options, of course, in relation to that particular suggestion. FaZe are no strangers to buying out players from their currently active rosters. They bought out Olaf and Guardian when they were active players on Fnatic and Na'Vi respectively. But they could also look towards the bench players, because they also got Carrigan from Astralis when he was on the bench as well. Personally, my eyes would be set on Taco, recently announced as the latest leaver to the SK roster, a team which FaZe have had a rough time dealing with. A great support player who supported the Luminosity and SK team to 2 back-to-back majors and an actual shit ton of titles since then. DreamHack Masters, IEMs, DreamHack Opens, fucking everything, literally everything. SK have had their hands on so many different trophies. I can't even name them off the top of my head. That's how bad it really is. Like they've had so many trophies, so many achievements, so many big major accomplishments, and Taco, I think, has been very instrumental in doing so. He's not a star player, definitely not the best in server performer, but for certain he has been a player that has I think set up Cold Zero and a bunch of other players to be able to do their jobs and be their star players in the SK Gaming roster. Plus his English is really good, so he'll be able to fit into FaZe overall, and I think that if they had the good chemistry, Taco could be a fantastic support player to replace one of their current lurkers, and currently If they wanted to make that kind of a roster move, that's where I personally go. That's where I would personally sit to the likes of Faze Clan. But that's only a last-minute solution. I definitely think that there's a lot more that this Faze 5-man can do. And I would be curious to see what else they're trying to do to make adjustments over the next coming few weeks. I definitely know that there are some roster locks that are currently applied. So I don't think we'll see a roster move at the moment. But if it is coming, then that's probably the play that I would see Faze currently making.